Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traven. These are my tomes, and it's time again for another weekly check-in. Not a whole lot to talk about this week, just one book and two comics. Before we jump into it, let me know down in the comments below what you've been reading this week. Got any recommendations for me? I love to hear from you all and to get those conversations going. Also, stay tuned to the end of the video where I'll talk about my anticipated reads for next week and what is coming out on the channel this week. We'll start off with my one novel read for this week, which was Between Two Fires by Christopher Newman. This is a medieval grimdark fantasy set during the bubonic plague in a world which is very similar to our own, but also includes magic and monsters, most of which is faith-based. It is through the lens of like Christian mythology, for lack of a better term. We have a war raging between heaven and hell, where God is explicitly not present, which I think is the grimmest, darkest type of writing you could possibly do. I am not the biggest fan of grimdark fantasy. I don't like the incredibly dire, bleak world building that it focuses on, but I do appreciate this one for having that sense of hope in it. And there was something about just the world here that was immediately captivating. There is so much despair and darkness here, and it was very difficult to read. Probably one of the reasons why I didn't get through too much this week is just how heavy this was. I was always interested in what was happening. It was always entertaining. It read very well, but it was just so bleak and dark and sad. I found it difficult to read for more than an hour or two at a time. This is a story about finding that one sliver of hope in the bleakest of circumstances. And unfortunately, in order to get to that point and have it be satisfying, you have to see some of the most depraved and awful acts by humans. It really put me in the mind of like a Berserk, if you've read that manga, which is another grimdark fantasy I really enjoy. The character study, the character focus is what really pulls that one off, and I think the same is true here. The knight Thomas and the girl, their relationship is really what drives this forward and makes it stand out. But I also found myself very captivated by this world in which evil has pretty much completely taken over, and it leads to some very tense moments and some really heartbreaking ones as well. For as dark as the story was set to be, I really didn't anticipate some of the sadder moments of this book happening, which I guess really shouldn't have been surprising. But again, just given how we were developing character, I didn't see some of these things happening, and it was really gut-wrenching, especially toward the end. One interesting thing to note about this is this book was actually published 14 years ago and is only now like really picking up steam. I found that a fascinating concept of just this book finding its niche years after it was released. If you're into grimdark fantasy, if you're into medieval fantasy, something akin to Game of Thrones perhaps, this is definitely worth checking out. It is also one and done, which I greatly appreciate. Although I waffled between 4 and 5, I ultimately went with 4 stars on this one, but know that that comes from someone who is already a little bit adverse to this genre. I read Kaya book 5 and maintain that this is still the best sci-fantasy comic being published today. This is continuing the story of Kaya and Jean, now accompanied by the trickster god Razel, not quite sure, as they attempt to free some prisoners from an encampment. This had some very good meditations on destiny and fate, the idea of if you are destined for something, if you have committed to a certain action, is your only goal to strive for that end. And Razzle makes the argument that if all you're doing in pursuing your destiny is trying to speed run it, essentially, if you're just trying to run toward that destiny at the expense of ignoring or hurting others, leaving others to their fate, then you are not doing what you should be. In typical Kaya fashion, we end at a place that's even bleaker than when we started. And without spoiling anything, I do feel like the end of this volume has massive ramifications for the story moving forward, depending on how long they want to prolong the major change that happens at the conclusion of this volume. This is a 5 out of 5 for me. This comic has been consistently great. If you've not checked it out, I highly recommend doing so. The art is amazing, world building is excellent, characters are amazing, and the story continues to develop in a way that's both surprising and organic and builds off of what came before in a very natural way. Lastly, for this week, I read Absolute Green Lantern Volume 2, Sojourn, which continues this cosmic horror mystery that was set up in Volume 1. Now, I am a very vocal fan of having comics and having stories that do not explain everything to you, that you have to work for a little bit. I talk about this with Knights. I talk about this with the Locked Tomb series. And it is one of the aspects of this story that I still really appreciate. There's not a lot of expository information here. There's not a lot of explaining and holding your hand as to what's going on. These characters that are fighting this space war, essentially, over what spectrum of light is going to be dominant, do not have the need or inclination to explain that to one another. And so as they're having these discussions and they're talking about their machinations and their designs, they don't stop and explain to you what all these terms mean. I really do appreciate that about the storytelling, and I like that you have to kind of pay attention and keep pace and just like let some things go, that you're not going to understand everything right away. You are going on this journey with Sojourner Truth as she becomes the Green Lantern and figures out what implication and what meaning that has in this dark universe. The Easter eggs continue to be really fun, as does the bit of world building that we had going on here. We have a character who has to wear a mask because if they ever see their whole face, then they suddenly cease to exist, which I found incredibly fascinating. That was a really weird, like, okay, there's other weird dark things going on here. This volume is also building Hector Hammond up as like the big bad of the story as a whole. But honestly, I don't find Hammond's threat to be that credible in the face of a giant death planet. And I felt like the thrust of the overall volume did very little to develop the story and move it forward. Yes, we get a lot of hints as to the larger lore. We get a lot of Easter eggs and new characters within this volume. But where Sojourner finds herself at the end of this volume versus the beginning of this volume is not wholly different, and I don't feel like this reached any kind of big climax. While I'm not arguing that that is something you need to have for your comic to be successful, I can see where some of the complaints from the community that this story is just moving a little bit too slow and doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. I can see those a little bit more after Volume 2 than I did with Volume 1. My rating for this did drop from a 5-star to a 4-star. I think I would still read this over Absolute Batman, but I think it's behind Martian Manhunter and Absolute Wonder Woman as far as my ranking of the Absolute books go overall. Still, if you are a Green Lantern fan, if you are a cosmic horror fan, if you want to see these characters re-envisioned in a dark universe, you do well to pick up Absolute Green Lantern. Just know that the pacing of the story is very slow. Let's talk about some of the things that are coming up for next week. I do plan on going back to some classics this week with some of my previous and current literary criticism books. So I've got Silas Marner, which is on my 26 for 2026 because I need to finish reading this one. And I've got Lost in Yonkers, which is a Neil Simon comedy, I believe, that I've never read before. So these I would like to get out of the way. They're both very short, so it shouldn't be too much difficulty getting those done. I want to get another 26 for 2026 off the board this week, so I've got Teddy Bears Never Die waiting in the wings. This will probably be my next pickup after I finish the classics. And then Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan, which is a much longer read of like 500 pages. I don't know if I'll get through all of these this week, but that is kind of what's in the pipe for next week. As far as plans for the channel this week, tomorrow you can tune in at 9 p.m. to chat with me about Grimdark Fantasy while I play Ender Lilies on our latest Pixels and Paperback live stream. On Thursday, I have a video looking at upcoming releases for the rest of 2026, which is really just an hour of me geeking out over all the things that are coming out that I'm very excited about. No live stream Saturday because I will be out of town, but on Sunday we'll have our Sunday Fun Day video. Check out these buns, where I'll look at a couple of Cullen Bunn's newest comic releases and give you my thoughts on whether or not you should pick up the trades when they come out. That's it for this week. Thanks for staying till the end of the video. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. I hope you come back and check out some of the videos we have planned for the rest of the week. And until the next one, take care.